Good evening. A killer is released from prison. Odds are he has trouble finding work. But tonight we'll tell you about a convicted killer who got a job with the federal government. And what a job. He was hired as a manager for the Bureau of Prisons. Just how he got there and what he did with his power raises some provocative questions. Jane?
As convicts approach the end of their prison terms, they're often sent to what's called a halfway house. There are about 300 nationwide. It's the system's last phase of rehabilitation before convicts re-enter society. Given that, we wondered why a convicted killer would be put in charge of the nation's largest halfway house. Brian Ross has the answer.
As federal parole officers on the streets of New York, Elaine Terenzi and Jim Fox thought they had heard it all from the ex-cons they deal with every day. Until 3 years ago, when Terenzi and Fox started to hear allegations about one of the big men in the criminal justice system, about what he was supposedly doing with inmates under his control.
Bondage, sadomasochistic sex, whipping.
Whipping?
Whipping.
The allegations were about this man, Harvey Alter, who was the director of the biggest federal halfway house in the country, a powerful man in charge of hundreds of inmates in a special rehabilitation program.
Harvey Alter was the dictator. He was the judge, the jury, the prosecutor.
At first, inmates were afraid to come forward, but as they did, one after another, with stories of torture and drugs and even death at Harvey Alter's halfway house, Fox and Terenzi started to listen very carefully.
There are times when you're literally holding the hand of the victim as he very painfully started to describe what had happened.
This is one of the inmates who came forward.
The more I cried, the more he whipped, and I couldn't stop crying because of what he was doing to me.
He says he was tortured and sexually abused by Harvey Alter at the halfway house, forced to go along or be sent back to prison. He asked us to protect his identity.
I was screaming, to God and to everybody else for help because I just couldn't believe the situation I'm in. I mean, I'm laying on a bed here with the director of the halfway house whipping me.
Under Harvey Alter, the country's largest federal halfway house, called the Manhattan House, became a living hell and a huge scandal. Now, an investigation by Dateline NBC into how all of that happened, how that was permitted to happen, and why it wasn't stopped sooner, raises serious questions about the competence of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the agency in charge of the $45 million a year halfway house program. There are almost 300 federal halfway houses around the country, like this one in Cincinnati. They're halfway between prison and the streets. Prisoners like 28-year-old Les Crow, a convicted cocaine dealer, spend the last few months of their sentence in the halfway house.
I'll be back, man.
Checking out every morning to find a place to live, to get a job. 14,000 federal prisoners a year, like Les Crow, go through the halfway house program, designed to help ex-cons go straight. But that's not what happened at Harvey Alter's halfway house. Not at all.
I'm still having nightmares about it.
The former inmate who talked with us took us back to the building where the halfway house was located. It's closed now, but he says in the 18 months that Harvey Alter was in charge here, Alter had his pick of victims from the hundreds of men under his control.
What became clear throughout the investigation is that they were coerced into having sex with Harvey Alter. And coerced sex is rape.
Harvey Alter ended up in charge of the country's largest federal halfway house when the Bureau of Prisons, to save money, turned over the operation of all halfway houses to private contractors. And Alter was able to get the $1.6 million a year contract to run the halfway house because the Bureau of Prisons failed to fully check out Alter's background. Any complete background check of Alter would have led to this block in Boston and to what happened in 1969 when police were called to this basement apartment at 233 Beacon Street, Harvey Alter's apartment. What police discovered should have prevented Alter from ever becoming the director of a federal halfway house. the aftermath of what prosecutors called a sex killing. The body of Alter's roommate found hanging in the closet. Alter, then a student at Emerson College, told police he had killed his roommate.
This killing resulted over homosexual advances by the defendant Harvey Alter towards his roommate Richard Philp, which apparently Philp resisted.
Former prosecutor William Doyle, who convicted Alter, says he couldn't believe it when he found out 20 years later that Alter had been put in charge of hundreds of federal inmates.
If they had done a background check, they should never have appointed him.
The scandal of how a convicted sex killer got the contract to run the biggest halfway house in the country has badly shaken the Bureau of Prisons in Washington.
We're doing everything within reason to know who we're contracting with.
John Clark is the official in charge of all federal halfway houses, brought in the wake of the Harvey Alter scandal. Would someone convicted of a sex murder be allowed to go in a halfway house?
Absolutely not, no.
How did it end up then that someone convicted of a sex murder ran a halfway house, the biggest federal halfway house? How did that happen?
That happened because he was a clever, unscrupulous sneak who beat the system that was in place at the time. We didn't know who he was, didn't know his background, and there was an unfortunate result.
But finding out about Harvey Alter's background is not difficult. Dateline NBC was able to find all the court and police records on Alter in just a few hours at the Boston courthouse. They go back to 1970 and show Alter pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of manslaughter and spent 4 years in state prisons and a mental institution. No one from the Bureau of Prisons ever saw these records because, again, to save money, officials relied on a background check that didn't go back to 1970. We spent just a few hours in the courthouse in Boston, and we found the criminal record of Harvey Alter. Why couldn't the Bureau of Prisons have done that?
We didn't know to go look. We did certain checks, the type of cursory criminal check that was done in that era.
That era was just a few years ago, and when the Bureau of Prisons failed to discover Alter's criminal background, it wasn't long before Alter's pattern of violence and sexual abuse re-emerged. Investigators say Alter forced inmates to check out of the halfway house and take trips with him to New York's Fire Island. The inmate we talked with said on one such trip, the drugs and the beatings got so bad, he thought Alter was going to kill him.
Anytime you get to know Harvey Alter, you see some of the rages he flies into, you know the man is capable of killing somebody. I'm lucky to be here. I'm lucky to be alive.
But another halfway house inmate wasn't so lucky. And what happened to 28-year-old Ernie Toretto finally helped to end Harvey Alter's reign of terror. Investigators say Alter pushed inmate Toretto so far with drugs and demands for sex that it led to a mental breakdown.
What began to emerge was a picture of a man who was basically heterosexual, recently married, wanted to desperately get out to see his wife and get his life back in order, and who was under a great deal of pressure to have sex with Harvey Alter.
Toretto, who came to the halfway house drug-free, was found dead in his room of a drug overdose. The official report, signed by halfway house director Harvey Alter.
The despair was linked to Harvey Alter. I believe he was responsible for his death. That's my opinion.
Mr. Alter? Alter was never charged with Toretto's death, but in 1990, he was indicted on 20 counts of sexual abuse. I want to talk to you about the court case and what happened at the Manhattan halfway house.
You'd have to contact my attorney, Lawrence Goldman.
Alter didn't want to talk to us and would not answer any questions about the torture, the sexual abuse, the death of Ernie Toretto. Mr. Alter, it's very important questions about how the halfway house operated. And important questions remain for the Bureau of Prisons, too. Not only did it fail to detect Alter's background, it also failed to detect any of Alter's criminal activities at the halfway house. For example, prison officials might have been able to prevent the death of inmate Ernie Toretto if they had noticed this highly unusual entry in the halfway house log. 2:50 a.m., resident Toretto signed out of the halfway house by Mr. H. Alter, apparently one of Alter's nights out with his inmate victims. 1 month later, Toretto was dead. Bureau of Prisons official Rick Luna was inspecting the halfway house that very week, but in his report, he had nothing but praise for Harvey Alter's halfway house. Luna wouldn't talk with us, and his bosses in Washington defend his actions.
This was in the logbook, and it shows that an inmate by the name of Toretto was checked out by Harvey Alter in the middle of the night. Now, this was going on when your man was supposedly checking out what was happening at the halfway house. The logbook was available to him. Don't you think there's a problem here?
Rick Luna is a marvelous manager. I know him. I've worked with him personally. I have full confidence in him.
Was any action taken against Mr. Luna?
No. Mr. Luna, as I say, is
Was he promoted?
Mr. Luna was promoted.
The man who had such praise for Harvey Alter's halfway house has now been put in charge of all federal halfway houses in the New York area.
Mr. Luna, the subcommittee...
Congressman Bob Wise, who's been holding hearings on the Alter case, says he thinks there are still big problems with the way the Bureau of Prisons is running the halfway house program.
We've got a growing number of halfway houses, growing number of inmates, real pressure to put these people somewhere. And so another Harvey Alter, if you're not doing the background check, if you're not doing a full investigation, Harvey Alter can exist anywhere.
My attorney has just advised me not to speak with you.
As for Harvey Alter, he's back in the federal prison system. The man once in charge of more federal halfway house inmates than anyone in the country began serving a 5-year sentence in federal prison this summer.
I just can't believe that they could ever allow a man like this to be put in that position. I mean, the one shot I had to put my life back together, and he took it away from me.
The story continues. After Alter was sentenced and his halfway house shut down, an investigation was launched into the new halfway house that replaced Alter's. And once again, there are allegations of sexual misconduct between inmates and staff. The man with oversight responsibility is Rick Luna with the U.S. Bureau of Prisons, the same man who was supposed to keep tabs on Alter's operation.